For those who were here last time I spoke, we're not going to have a dance party or chocolate at the end of service today. I'm not sure if that's a disappointment or if it brings relief to those who were here last time, but it'll be a little bit different this morning. But I do have some thoughts that have been stirring the past few weeks I hope will be helpful as we move into the new season. So we've spent the months since Easter looking at patterns. So far, we've looked at all of these things that we can build into our lives to make us look more like Jesus. So stillness, contending prayer, thanksgiving, loving others, generosity, reconciling power, vocation, word and deed, hospitality, justice and compassion, presence, consistency, prayer, celebration, renewal, worship, submission, proclamation, and being still. We've talked about some really good stuff. When I was looking over that list this week, I was just remembering some of those sermons and got really excited. So this process of being formed more into Christ's likeness is often called Christian formation. And it is the slowest of all human movements. Some days I find that really frustrating because I'm part of the microwave generation that wants everything to be quick and easy. But I also find it really encouraging because it reminds me that I'm not falling behind, or I'm not being judged by God because it's taking me so long to look like Jesus. The truth is, this process will take our whole lives, and the weight of responsibility for our growth doesn't fall on us alone. In Philippians 1:6, Paul writes that he who began the good work in us will be faithful to complete it. It's Jesus, through his Spirit working in us, that's ultimately the one who transforms us. We can't will it to happen. What we can do is make ourselves available to him. We can't produce the wind that sails the ship where it needs to go, but we can raise and adjust our sails so that we catch the wind that he's trying to take us. Yeah. So that's what these practices we've been learning about are doing in us. They're allowing us to catch the wind of the Holy Spirit and be transformed by his work in us. Learning about prayer, generosity, hospitality, being still, celebration, all the other patterns we've looked at isn't enough. Sadly, we aren't transformed by what we know. Our character, who we are in our core, the person exposed in our gut reactions, is shaped not by what we know, but by something much deeper and pre-conscious before we even think about it. If it was simply about having the right information, I would be fit and far healthier than I am. I know what I need to do for my body to be transformed, but there's a gap between what I know and what I do. In the book, You Are What You Love, James K.A. Smith points out that we were created as far more than brains on a stick. Was a philosopher, I think it was Descartes or something like that, who said, you are what you think, or I think, therefore I am. But that's not entirely true. Our emotions, our will, and our bodies, and how we use all of those, shape who we become. It's important to take a moment here and think about the story we were created into. We were made to co-create with God, to work toward his kingdom being built on earth. We were created to long for and work towards God's vision for the world, for the flourishing of humanity and the rest of creation. So despite the entrance of sin and brokenness into the story of the world, we all still have that wiring to dream of and work toward our vision of the good life. Our view of what human flourishing looks like informs our deep desires, our loves, and it's our loves that shape who we are. The things we love become our compass and guide us toward the story we are shaped by. In short, we are what we love more than what we think. Here's where I'm confronted with a problem. I can accept that I am what I love, but what if I don't love what I think I do? To use my previous example, I may say I'd love to be fit, but my actions say that what I actually love is comfort food and sitting on the sofa. I can truthfully say I love and desire God, but all too often my actions show that he may not be the ultimate object of my love. Perhaps it's more accurate to say I want to desire and love God. So the next question is, what shapes our desires? If we are transformed in the place of our heart, our deepest desires and pre-conscious reactions, how can we hope to change something that happens before we're even aware of it? And the answer to that is liturgy. Liturgy is a religious word that indicates a formula for worship. So it may seem an odd word for our use today, but the truth is that just as we were created to co-create and work with God, we were created to worship. Every person on earth worships, even if they don't automatically turn their worship toward God. So another way of saying I am what I love is to say I am what I worship. Just as we have habits or rituals that guide the way we gather on a Sunday morning, there are rituals that guide the way we operate in our lives. While these habits may seem like ordinary activities of daily living, they are not just things we do, they do things to us. For example, another confession. A habit in my life I know I need to change is my current liturgy of waking up and reaching for my phone. It seems innocent enough. I'm not looking at anything bad. Maybe Facebook, maybe playing a game, maybe even reading the word of the day, the verse of the day, or something like that. But the habit is shaping me into a consumer, someone who feels the need to be entertained all the time. A person who rarely allows myself space to be still, like Mike talked about last week. So by reaching for distraction the moment I wake up, I am being formed, or possibly deformed, into someone I don't particularly want to be. I know what I should do instead, but unless I change the liturgy I'm engaging in, I'm being formed into someone who worships self-centeredness, entertainment, distraction, and consumerism. The small everyday things we do shape us, and our choices in these small things make a big difference in how we are formed. In her book, Liturgy of the Ordinary, Tish Harrison Warren says, our way of being in the world works its way into us through ritual and repetition. A view of the good life is ingrained in us through repetitive practices that motivate how we live and what we love. We are shaped every day, whether we know it or not, by practices, rituals, and liturgy that make us who we are. She goes on to say, our hearts and our loves are shaped by what we do again and again and again. And just so you know, I spied a copy of this on the bottom shelf of the bookshelf in there, the bookshelf. So if anybody wants to grab a copy of that book, it's really, really good.
No running though, for
Yeah. Don't run over any kids on your way in. So in this book, she goes through a day of explaining how things like making the bed, brushing our teeth, sitting in traffic, drinking tea, and eating leftovers can be liturgies that shape our hearts to want the story of God to be our central story, or the story that defines us. I love the paraphrase of Romans 12, 1 and 2 from the Message. It's up there. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. So there are a couple of things from these verses I want to bring out. First, our everyday ordinary life is worthy of being offered to God. Not only is he worthy of receiving it, but it's worthy to be offered. I so often think God has far bigger things to think about than my sleeping or eating habits, but he cares about those things. Not in a judgmental way because they don't match the healthiest standards, but because he cares about me, and giving him every part of my day is an offering that pleases him. It's the same for you. I recently heard a parable about skipped a paragraph, sorry. The other part of the verse that I want to spend a couple moments talking about is the aspect of culture. Our culture offers its own liturgies, and so often we're not aware of them, or how they shape us. I recently heard a parable about two young fish swimming along. They encounter an older fish going the other direction, and he says, "Hi boys, how's the water?" And as he swims on, they look at each other and say, "What on earth is water?" Like these young fish, we are immersed in our culture, and we can be wholly unaware of what surrounds us. As Romans 12 says, we become so well adjusted we fit in without thinking about it at all. But we can choose to fix our attention on God and allow him to change us from the inside out, to develop us into the people we are created to be, to bear his image in the world, and to work toward his view of the good life. So how do we do this in practice? How do we partner with God to reshape our hearts and loves? First, we need to be aware of the water we're swimming in and how it forms us. What's the cultural environment that you're living in? Do you recognize it? How is our culture shaping us as we breathe it in each day? What are the places of worship offered by the culture we're immersed in? And what are the liturgies we're taught? Some alternative places of worship that spring to my mind immediately are shopping centers, cinemas, sports stadiums, concert halls. How are these cultural liturgies shaping our hearts to love and worship? What story do they tell? Is it the story of God's kingdom or of a counterfeit kingdom? It's also worth noting that even though we all live in the same place geographically, pretty much, the culture we're immersed in can look really different depending on where and how we spend our time, who we spend it with, how we engage online, and the media that we consume. Second, we need to build habits into our life that orientate and form us in the way of Jesus instead of a rival kingdom. Many of the things we've learned about over the last number of weeks can be useful in this. A great way to establish this is a rule of life. According to Practicing the Way, a rule of life is a schedule or set of practices and relational rhythms that help us create space in our busy world for us to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what he did. It's a simple tool to help align our schedule with our values. So on the church website, www.foylevineyard.co.uk/patterns, I think I got that right, is a list of resources to help with establishing a rule of life. And I highly encourage you to set aside a bit of time this week to look at those and prayerfully consider what it could look like to build a framework for growth. We'll leave that one up there for just a minute in case anybody wants to grab the QR code. It takes you to that website. So there are a number of keys to building these transformational habits into our lives. One of these keys is to start small. My tendency is to try to change everything in one go, because I know in my head what needs to happen. I try to implement it all at once. This is a recipe for disaster, at least in my life. My willpower is not enough to keep me doing what I know I should do all the time. And when I inevitably fail to keep up with the changes I've started, I get discouraged, feel ashamed, usually give up completely, thinking change is just too hard for me. Or maybe that I'm just too weak to do it. Maybe it's possible for everybody else, but not me. So by setting small goals and making manageable changes, we can set ourselves up for real lasting transformation. So I sat down the other day and just wrote a list of little things that could be possible for us to implement. Obviously, you don't have to do these, they're just ideas. But 1, take a moment when you first wake up to just breathe. Acknowledge God's presence with you and commit the day to him. You can do that in a few seconds. These aren't on there, sorry. Write out a short prayer or verse of scripture and tape it to your mirror and read and pray it every day when you're brushing your teeth. Take time at the end of your day to write down 3 things you're thankful for and thank God for them. Plan a weekly dinner with your family with no devices. Practice hospitality by inviting someone for tea once a month. Buy 1 less coffee each week and give that money to a charity, or buy a coffee or a meal for someone in need. Take time while you shower to thank God for your body and all the ways it's a blessing. Don't veer into picking apart the things you don't like. Just recognize the marvelous gift we've been given and the beautiful intricacy of God's design. Another is, as you walk or drive to your place of work or school, speak a blessing over the place and those you'll be with that day. Ask God for his Spirit to work through you to bless others. These are all little things that don't take much time, can fit into our busy lives. It doesn't have to be a massive thing. But as we engage in these liturgies, these habits, they will begin to change who we are. Another key is consistency. Once you decide on the habit you want to build, be consistent. In the beginning, it takes intentionality, because these things aren't our natural go-tos. We have to consciously decide to build new habits and new liturgies, and as we persevere in practicing them, they will become second nature. Just as our bodies breathe, digest food, and walk naturally without us really giving any thought to it, we can add on to those activities a second nature that comes just as naturally with consistent practice. How many of you who drive a car consciously think about every single action you take behind the wheel now, the way that you did when you were first learning? Constantly rehearsing in your head to check mirrors, press the clutch or brake, change gears, use signals, probably doesn't happen anymore. I remember arriving at places when I was driving in the States and not even remembering the journey because my brain was somewhere else. The actions needed to drive safely had become second nature, and that's the goal here. There could also be a cautionary tale there about getting out of practice and losing some of the reflexive knowledge. Because after not driving for 4 years, I'm now far less comfortable with the idea of getting behind a wheel. But I'm sure I'd get back into the swing fairly quickly if I started practicing again. That brings me to another key to building habits. Give yourself grace. Life gets crazy. Sometimes routine things get missed. As an aside, we also live in a fallen world where there's an antagonist in God's story who's desperate to keep us from reaching our potential. He often throws things in our way to derail our journey. That's a sermon for another day, but it's important to be aware that our struggles may have factors beyond our own weakness and the world's brokenness. That said, missing a day or a week or more of something we're trying to practice isn't total failure. Too often I've started a new habit, missed a few days, and then felt like a failure and given up. The only failure is giving up on growth. Notice I didn't say giving up on that specific habit. That's the next key to building transformational habits, is being willing to adjust our rule of life as seasons change. We've talked about so many practices that we can build into our lives, and there are loads that haven't been covered this summer. As we grow, life happens, seasons change. The practices that help us grow also shift. Sometimes we need to spend time in the scriptures and mine them deeply for the treasures they contain. Sometimes we need to just be still and be present with God with no agenda, no Bible reading plan, no prayer. Sometimes we need lament, and other times we need to engage in celebration. Different practices will be effective in different seasons of life. Being willing to let go of things that aren't working and try new things is important. The final key to mention is be patient. As I mentioned before, Christian formation is the slowest of all human movements. Many days I don't see any change or growth at all in my life. Some days it feels more like I'm going backward. But when I look back over my life, I can see a little bit more of Jesus in me today than I did a few years ago. God isn't in a hurry like we so often are, and transforming us is his thing, and he does it in his time. Our job is to be faithful to adjust our sails. So as we finish this morning, I'm going to put a few questions up on the screen, and we're just going to take a few minutes. I get Ali and Mike up to play a bit of music. And think of these questions. Maybe one of them will stick out to you more than the others. And just see what God might want to say. So what is the water you're swimming in, and how is it shaping you? What do you want to want? Like I mentioned, wanting to want God more, even if he's not the ultimate object of my desire. What are the things you think you love? And do your daily habits point to those things being what you actually love? And then finally, what small changes can you make in your daily routines, your liturgies of the ordinary, that will form you into someone who looks more like Jesus and seeks his vision of the good life?
Thank you for joining us at Foyle Vineyard Church. We love walking out this adventure of being a family together on mission. If you've joined us for the first time today, we'd love to connect with you further. Head over to our website, www.foylevineyard.co.uk, and click I'm New to keep up to date with all the ways in which you can get involved with this busy family. Have a wonderful week, and God bless.